house was quiet again. The kind of silence that used to feel peaceful, but now felt hollow. Claire sat by the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. Her husband Ryan was still at work. He always was. He said he was doing it for them, for their future. But lately, their future felt like an excuse for their present absence. They'd been married for 8 years. Once those years had been full of laughter, inside jokes, and lazy Sunday mornings. Now they were marked by unanswered texts, distant smiles, and dinner eaten in silence. It wasn't that they fought. It was worse. They didn't talk much at all. That night, Claire made dinner anyway. She cooked his favorite, roast chicken with rosemary, though she knew he might not even notice. When he came home, drenched from the rain, she greeted him softly. "Hey, you're late." He nodded, hanging his jacket. "Yeah, traffic." The word hung in the air, thin and unconvincing. He kissed her cheek out of habit, not emotion. She smiled faintly and went back to the table, though her appetite had already vanished. Over dinner, the clink of forks filled the air where conversation used to live. Claire tried asking about his day. He gave short answers. His eyes kept drifting to his phone. When she stopped trying, he didn't even notice. After he went upstairs to work on his laptop, she cleared the dishes, washed them slowly, and stared out the kitchen window at the dark backyard. She wondered when their marriage had shifted from love to routine. She couldn't pinpoint the moment. It had happened quietly, like dust settling on old furniture. Later, she wandered into the spare room at the back of the house, her art studio. It had been months since she'd been in there. The air smelled faintly of paint and turpentine. Canvases leaned against the wall, half-finished, abandoned when life had gotten too busy. She turned on the small lamp and stood in front of the biggest canvas. The sight of it stirred something in her. It was a painting of a sunset over the ocean, soft and incomplete. She remembered starting it the night before their anniversary last year, when Ryan had promised to come home early. He never did. She sighed and picked up a paintbrush. At first, her hand hesitated. Then, with one slow stroke, she began again. The bristles glided across the canvas, mixing colors, blending emotions she hadn't said aloud in months. The quietness of the room wrapped around her like a secret. Painting had always been her private world, a place where she could be honest. The blue in her painting deepened into longing. The orange turned into memory. Each brushstroke felt like she was breathing again after holding it in for too long. She didn't hear Ryan come down the hall. He had finished his call upstairs, planning to grab some water, when he noticed the faint glow from her studio door. He paused. It had been months since he'd seen her paint. He walked closer, drawn by curiosity. When he stepped inside, he stopped. Claire stood in front of the canvas, her hair loose around her shoulders, her sweater slipping slightly off one arm, completely lost in her world. She didn't notice him, not yet. There was a kind of quiet intensity in the way she moved, her face soft with focus, her lips parted slightly as she exhaled between strokes. Ryan had forgotten this version of her, the passionate, creative, alive woman he had fallen in love with. Seeing her like that brought a wave of emotion he hadn't expected. It wasn't desire, it was awe, and a little bit of guilt. He realized how much of her he had stopped seeing. When Claire finally turned, startled, she froze. "Ryan, I didn't hear you." He stepped closer but stayed gentle. "I didn't mean to startle you." Her cheeks warmed as she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's okay. I was just painting." He looked at the canvas. "It's beautiful," she gave a small smile. "It's not finished." Ryan tilted his head. The painting showed a shoreline at dusk, 2 figures standing close but not touching. Between them was an empty space filled with fading light. "Is that us?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe it's who we used to be." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside deepened, tapping against the windows. The room felt suspended in time. Ryan finally said, "You look different when you paint, happier." Claire gave a soft, almost broken laugh. "Maybe that's because it's the only time I feel seen." The words caught him off guard. "Seen?" She nodded, her voice trembling slightly. You come home, we talk about work, bills, groceries, but you don't really look at me anymore, not the way you used to. He took a breath, his chest heavy. I didn't realize you felt that way. That's the problem, Ryan, she said quietly. You never do. She turned back to the painting, her brush trembling in her hand. She dipped it into the color again, refusing to meet his eyes. You caught me at my most intimate moment, she said softly, and I didn't stop. Because this, right here, is the only part of me that still feels alive. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and Ryan's expression softened. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. He walked closer until he was standing just behind her, his reflection merging with hers in the window. Claire, he said quietly, I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it. She froze, her brush hovering midair. For a long moment, neither moved. The only sound was the rain outside and the faint ticking of the wall clock. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Then maybe it's time we both remember. Their eyes met in the glass, not directly but through reflection. It was almost poetic. Two people seeing each other clearly only when they looked through something else. Ryan didn't reach for her, not yet. He could tell she wasn't ready for that kind of closeness, but there was something new in the air, something small and fragile like hope. I miss this, he said softly. You, I mean, Claire smiled faintly. Then don't keep missing it. The moment hung between them, tender but uncertain. The kind of moment that could become a new beginning, or another silence. Ryan turned toward the canvas again. Can I stay while you paint? She looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, the tired eyes, the quiet sincerity. Then she nodded. You can, but just don't talk. Just be here. So he stayed. He stood by the window, watching her paint under the dim glow of the lamp. The world outside faded to darkness, but inside, something stirred. Something quiet, like a heartbeat waking after too long. For the first time in months, Claire didn't feel invisible. For the first time in years, Ryan remembered what love looked like when it was real. And neither of them knew it yet. But that small, silent night in the studio would be the beginning of everything that came next. The next morning, sunlight poured gently into the kitchen, catching the faint smell of coffee. Claire sat at the counter with her mug, still thinking about last night, about the way Ryan had stood silently beside her as she painted. He hadn't said much, but his quiet presence had meant more than any words could. For the first time in months, the silence between them hadn't felt cold. It had felt hopeful. When Ryan came down, freshly showered and dressed for work, he paused for a moment, watching her. She looked different, calm but thoughtful, as if her mind was somewhere else. Morning, he said softly. She looked up and smiled faintly. Morning, he hesitated before sitting across from her. I didn't know you were still painting, he said. I wasn't, she replied. Not until last night. He nodded slowly, searching for the right words. You were amazing, Claire. I don't know how I forgot that part of you. She looked down at her mug, her fingers tracing the rim. You didn't forget, she said quietly. You just stopped looking. Her tone wasn't bitter, just honest, and that honesty stung more than anger ever could. Ryan wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had been tired, distracted, trying to keep up with work. But he didn't. Deep down, he knew she was right. I want to fix this, he said finally. I don't want us to keep living like strangers. Claire looked up at him, her eyes tired but soft. Then stop saying it and start showing it. Her words stayed with him all day. At the office, his coworkers noticed he was quieter than usual. His mind wasn't on spreadsheets or emails. It was back in that small studio, watching his wife paint, realizing how much of her he had let fade into the background. When he got home that evening, Claire was sitting on the back porch, sketchbook in her lap, the sky glowing pink with sunset. He approached quietly. I didn't mean to interrupt, she smiled without looking up. You're not interrupting. Mind if I sit? She gestured to the chair beside her. Go ahead. They sat together, side by side, the kind of closeness that didn't need words. For a while, all he did was watch her draw. Her hand moved lightly across the paper, quick, confident strokes. He could see it now. The small details he had once loved. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was focused. How her lips pressed together slightly when she concentrated. Do you ever draw me? He asked suddenly. She laughed softly. I used to. When we were first married. I sketched you all the time. He turned to her. Why'd you stop? Her pencil paused. Because I stopped recognizing you. He looked down. Her words cutting deep but true. Then she sighed and closed the sketchbook. Ryan, I'm not blaming you for everything. I know I disappeared too. I got tired of trying to reach you when you weren't there anymore. Maybe I gave up first, just in a quieter way. He nodded, his throat tight. I don't want to keep missing each other, Claire. For a moment, the only sound was the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. Then he reached out slowly, resting his hand on hers. It was a simple touch, hesitant, careful, but it was the first real one in months. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked down at their hands, intertwined, and whispered, I've missed this. He smiled faintly. So have I. That night they ate dinner together without their phones. It wasn't perfect. Conversation was slow and a bit awkward, but it was something. They talked about simple things, her art, his new project, the old Italian restaurant they used to go to. Every small laugh, every shared glance felt like rediscovering something they thought was lost. Later, while cleaning up, Ryan noticed one of her paintings leaning against the wall. It was new, a soft swirl of color, like light breaking through clouds. What's this one called? He asked. She smiled. Maybe Hope, she said. He nodded. It fits. That night, when she went upstairs, she found a note on her pillow. Ryan's handwriting was uneven, rushed. You were right, I stopped looking. But I see you now. I see the woman who still makes the world more beautiful just by being in it. She read it twice, her eyes misting. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was real. The next morning, she slipped the note into her sketchbook. She didn't say anything about it, but when Ryan kissed her cheek before leaving for work, she smiled. A real one this time. Days passed. Their home began to change in small ways. He started coming home earlier. She began leaving the studio door open again. They cooked dinner together, laughed over old stories, and sometimes just sat quietly, enjoying each other's company. But even as things softened between them, there was still an invisible distance, something fragile they both felt, but didn't know how to bridge completely. Claire still caught herself wondering if his affection was temporary, if the spark would fade again once life got busy. One evening, she was painting in the studio again when Ryan walked in, holding 2 mugs of tea. You've been in here for hours, he said gently. Thought you might need a break. She smiled and took the mug. Thank you. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You know, it's strange. I see you paint, and it feels like I'm meeting you all over again. She looked up from the canvas. Is that a good thing? He smiled faintly. It's the best thing. She set down her brush and studied him, the man she'd known for almost a decade, who now felt both familiar and new. You know, Ryan, I don't need perfection, she said quietly. I just need you to keep showing up, even when it's hard. Especially then, he nodded, stepping closer. I can do that. And in that moment, she believed him. Not because of what he said, but because of how he looked at her. It was the same way he used to, years ago, when love was easy and everything felt possible. The rain began again outside, tapping softly on the windows. She turned back to the painting. Another ocean scene. But this time, the 2 figures were standing closer, their hands finally touching. Ryan stood behind her, his presence steady. That one's us, isn't it? He asked. She smiled gently. It's who we're trying to be. They stood together, watching the colors dry under the dim studio light. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There were no promises, no sudden declarations. Just quiet understanding, the kind that only comes after two people have nearly lost each other and are still brave enough to try again. For the first time in a long time, Claire didn't feel the ache of distance. She felt the slow warmth of connection returning. Ryan reached out and brushed his fingers against hers. A simple touch, but one that carried all the words they didn't need to say. And though they didn't know what would happen next, one thing was certain: they were both finally looking in the same direction again. A week later, Claire was preparing for the local art exhibition, her first in nearly 5 years. Her small collection of paintings, full of quiet emotion and soft colors, had caught the curator's eye at a local cafe. It should have been exciting, but as the day grew closer, her nerves twisted tighter. She hadn't been on a stage, even a small one, since before her marriage had started to feel like a quiet drift apart. Ryan noticed the tension. He had watched her work every evening, her hands moving quickly, her focus sharp, but her smile sometimes fading when she thought no one was looking. On the morning of the exhibition, he stood by the doorway, watching her pack her brushes and notes. "You'll do great," he said softly. She looked up at him, her hands trembling slightly. "What if I'm not ready?" He walked closer, taking the bag from her. "You are. You've been ready for years, you just forgot." She smiled faintly, touched by the sincerity in his voice. For the first time in a long while, she believed it. By evening, the small gallery was filled with the hum of quiet voices and the scent of wine and fresh flowers. Paintings lined the walls, her paintings, and Claire stood near the center, looking both proud and nervous. Her heart pounded every time someone stopped to admire her work. Ryan arrived a little late, dressed neatly, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies, her favorite. When he walked in, his eyes scanned the room until they found her. She looked radiant, confident but gentle, with that quiet grace he had once fallen for. When she saw him, her breath caught slightly. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen in a long time. Pride. Not the polite kind, but deep, genuine pride. He handed her the flowers. "You look beautiful, Claire," he said simply. "Thank you," she whispered, her cheeks warming. "You being here means more than you know," he smiled. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." But as the night went on, something unexpected happened. While Claire was talking with guests, another man approached her. Ethan Hayes, an art critic and gallery owner from Chicago. He was friendly, charming, and noticeably captivated by her work. "I have to say," Ethan said, his voice smooth, "your use of color is incredible. There's emotion in every stroke. It's rare to see that kind of honesty in modern art." Claire smiled shyly. "Thank you. That's the best compliment I could ask for." Ethan leaned a bit closer, lowering his voice. "Honesty like that only comes from someone who's lived deeply. You must have a story behind every piece." His words lingered in the air longer than they should have. Claire felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Not because she was flattered, but because his attention caught her off guard. For years, no one had looked at her that way. As an artist, as a woman who carried meaning. Across the room, Ryan noticed. He stood quietly, his expression unreadable, watching as Ethan and Claire talked. There was nothing improper, just two people sharing a conversation. Yet something about it struck him deeply. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was realization. For the first time, he was seeing Claire through someone else's eyes. And he finally understood how easily he could have lost her. Claire, sensing his gaze, turned slightly and met his eyes across the room. For a moment, everything around them faded. There he was, the man she loved, standing still among the crowd, watching her with a mix of pride and pain. She excused herself gently from Ethan and walked toward Ryan. "Hey," she said softly. He smiled, but his voice was quiet. "You are amazing up there. Everyone can see how talented you are." "Thank you," she said, studying his face. "You okay?" He nodded, his tone thoughtful. "Yeah, just realizing how lucky I am." That simple line stayed with her all night. When the exhibition ended, and the guests began leaving, Ryan helped her pack her paintings. As they walked to the car, the city lights glimmered off wet pavement. A soft drizzle had begun. "You know," Ryan said as he loaded the last canvas into the car, "I haven't seen you like this in years." "You were glowing in there," Claire laughed lightly. It felt good to be seen again. He looked at her then, his voice sincere. "You've always been worth seeing, Claire. I just forgot how to look." She met his eyes, her heart tightening. "You're seeing me now." That night, when they got home, Claire stood by the window, still holding one of the lilies. Rain streaked down the glass, and Ryan joined her quietly. They didn't speak at first. There was no need. The silence was full, but this time, full of warmth, not distance. Finally, she turned to him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't found our way back?" He took her hand gently. "I try not to, because the thought of not finding you again, that's something I can't stand." She smiled through quiet tears. "You already did, Ryan. You found me again." He brushed his thumb over her hand, a small, tender gesture that carried all the meaning words couldn't hold. But even as the moment softened, there was still a shadow in his eyes. Something unspoken. The image of Ethan talking to Claire lingered in his mind, not out of mistrust, but because it made him confront a truth he'd avoided for too long. He had taken her presence for granted. That night, while Claire slept, Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the years that had passed between them. The quiet dinners, the missed conversations, the slow drift that neither had stopped soon enough. And now, watching her rediscover her light, he knew he couldn't ever let it fade again. The next morning, he left early for work, but wrote a note on the counter. "Last night I saw the woman I fell in love with. Strong, beautiful, and full of life. I don't ever want to forget her again." When Claire found it, she smiled softly, touched by the simple truth of it. Later that day, she received a call from Ethan. He wanted to feature her work in a small Chicago gallery. It was an incredible opportunity, one she'd never expected. She hesitated, wondering how Ryan would feel, but deep down she knew this was her moment. When Ryan came home that evening, she told him, "Ethan wants to display my paintings in Chicago." He paused, then smiled. "That's amazing, Claire. You're okay with it?" she asked gently. He stepped closer, his voice firm but kind. "Of course I am. You deserve this. I'll be cheering you on, no matter where you go." Her eyes softened. "I don't want to go anywhere without you." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then I'll make sure I'm right there beside you." As the night settled around them, Claire felt something shift. They weren't just healing, they were beginning again. And though the path ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. This time, they both wanted to fight for it. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and clean. Claire stepped onto the porch, breathing it in. Ryan joined her, slipping his hand into hers. He looked at her with quiet awe, as though he was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the very first time. And this time, she didn't look away. The weeks after the exhibition felt like a quiet sunrise in Claire and Ryan's life. Things weren't perfect, but they were real. Ryan made time for her. Dinners at home, late-night walks, soft laughter that used to feel impossible. Claire's art began to blossom again, and her confidence grew with every brushstroke. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet question in both their hearts. Could they truly rebuild what had been lost, or were they just learning to live with the cracks? When the Chicago Gallery invitation turned into a confirmed event, Claire was thrilled and terrified. It would mean a week away from home, surrounded by new people and opportunities. A part of her wanted to share it all with Ryan, but another part knew he had his own world. Meetings, clients, endless work. One evening, as she was preparing her portfolio, she looked up to find Ryan standing by the door, watching her pack. "When do you leave?" he asked. "Monday morning," she said. "I'll be back by Friday," he nodded slowly. "I could take a few days off, come with you." She smiled softly, touched. You'd really do that? He shrugged lightly. Why wouldn't I? You've supported me for years. It's my turn. She looked down, hiding a small smile. I'd love that. They spent the weekend preparing together. For the first time in years, it felt like they were a team again. Laughing, sharing coffee, teasing each other about packing too much. When Monday came, Ryan carried her bags to the car, kissed her forehead, and said, "Whatever happens out there, just remember, you deserve every bit of this." The drive to Chicago was long but peaceful. They talked about everything: the early days of their marriage, their favorite memories, their plans for the future. Claire couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so close to him. When they reached the city, the gallery buzzed with energy. Claire's paintings hung in a bright, open space filled with soft music and conversation. Ryan stayed close but let her have her moment. He watched her talk to guests, saw how people admired her, and realized with quiet pride how strong she had become. But then, during the evening, something unexpected happened. A woman named Marissa, one of the gallery assistants, approached Ryan. She was kind, friendly, and clearly intrigued by him. They spoke for a few minutes about the art, and though it was harmless, Claire saw them from across the room. She wasn't angry, just still. For a fleeting second, she saw what he had seen weeks earlier. How easy it was to take someone for granted until someone else noticed them. When Ryan turned and found her eyes on him, he froze. The realization hit him all at once. This was what she must have felt before. The moment of being unseen, of wondering if the person you loved was slowly slipping away. He crossed the room immediately, his expression gentle but firm. "Claire," he said quietly, "come with me." They stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was calm, lit by soft lamps and the glow of passing cars. "I saw your face," Ryan said quietly. "You thought I didn't notice, but I did." She sighed, crossing her arms. "I wasn't upset, I just understood something." He stepped closer. "What?" "That people only lose each other when they stop trying to be seen." "I stopped trying once. You did too. And I think that's what almost ended us." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I almost lost you because I forgot how to notice the small things. Your voice, your silence, your art, your heart." She looked up, eyes glistening in the soft streetlight. "But you didn't lose me." "No," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You stayed, even when I didn't deserve it." She smiled faintly. "We both stayed." For a long moment they just stood there, hands almost touching, the noise of the city fading around them. Then Ryan finally spoke, his tone quieter, steadier. "Claire, when I saw you tonight, the way people looked at your art, the way they looked at you, I realized something. You've always been extraordinary. I just needed to remember to say it out loud." She blinked back tears, whispering, "And you've always been the reason I believed I could be." The wind blew softly, carrying the faint scent of rain. He reached out, taking her hands in his. "Let's not go back to what we were. Let's build something new, something better." She nodded slowly. "I'd like that." The next few days in Chicago were unforgettable. They walked through museums, ate at small cafes, and laughed like people rediscovering friendship as much as love. Ryan watched her speak on stage during an artist Q&A session, his heart full of admiration. When she finished, she caught his eye and smiled. A quiet, knowing smile that said thank you for being here. By Friday, her paintings had sold out. The gallery owner congratulated her, offering to represent her full-time. Claire was overwhelmed, but Ryan squeezed her hand. "Say yes," he whispered. "You've earned this," she did. And for the first time, she felt both proud and peaceful. On their drive home, rain began to fall again, steady and calm. Claire rested her head on Ryan's shoulder, watching the drops trail down the window. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing this?" she asked softly. He nodded, eyes fixed on the road. "Every day, and it makes me never want to stop trying." She smiled, closing her eyes. That's all I ever needed. When they reached home, the air felt lighter, like something had shifted. Their house, once quiet and distant, now felt alive again. The small things they'd ignored before suddenly mattered. Coffee together in the morning, walks after dinner, her laughter filling the room. One evening, a few weeks later, Claire stood in her studio finishing a new painting. It was a scene of two figures standing under the rain, their hands touching but not holding, light reflecting off the wet ground around them. Ryan walked in quietly, leaning against the doorway. "It's beautiful," he said. She smiled without turning around. "It's us." He stepped closer, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. "Then we should give it a name." She thought for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe Found." He nodded, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Perfect." They stood there for a while, the smell of paint in the air, the quiet hum of the world outside. After everything, the distance, the doubt, the quiet heartbreak, they had found their way back. Not to what they were, but to something new, something honest. That night, as they turned off the lights and climbed into bed, Claire whispered, "You know, there was a time I thought we were beyond saving." Ryan turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I think love doesn't disappear. It just waits for us to find it again." He kissed her forehead, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then I'm glad I finally did." Outside, the rain began once more, soft and steady, like the world was quietly celebrating their return to each other. For the first time in years, Claire fell asleep without the weight of what-ifs. She knew they weren't perfect, but they were real, and sometimes that was more than enough.